Bennett Foddy, welcome to the Game Informer Show, sir.
Thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you. Every once in a while on the podcast, we like to have somebody who has just a completely unique view of the entire game industry. And I feel like somebody with your expertise is exactly that perspective that we're looking for. So what has the last, 6 months been like for you in the game industry? What have you learned about what a weird place this is?
Yeah, I guess the main thing that has been a kind of learning experience for me is I don't think I had a good grasp of streaming culture or YouTube culture, particularly when I was working on this game over the summer.
This is getting over it, by the way.
Right, getting over it. I was aware of streamers. Obviously, I watched some streams. I'd watched some YouTube Let's Plays. Everybody has. But I don't think I really understood the kind of nuances of the culture, and I think that's kind of so central to the way people experience this kind of game now. So it was like watching people interact with my game, watching the kind of the styles of interaction, the kind of social and moral norms and mores that have kind of established themselves on those platforms. Was a real crazy learning experience for me. Because I've never been like a big streaming fan, so I've never really gotten it before, but now I sort of have more of a sense of what it is that people are getting out of that experience of watching a game being played. And, that was super fascinating.
Is it to the point where you're just watching a bunch of streams of getting over it and taking notes on what you're learning along the way? Or do you enjoy sitting back and just kind of sampling everything that people are doing with your game?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely was watching some, especially the first few people who I could see were playing it were kind of indie-friendly streamers who got early copies from Humble Bundle, and just sort of watching them go through, and they're going in completely blind. They're not sure what to expect, and it was sort of interesting for me to watch that sort of take place and see how they reacted to it. And also importantly, to sort of see how their viewers were reacting to it as well. It's really kind of a community feel watching those things. But I guess to me, there were sort of two aspects of this that I think were super jumped out. One of them is there's like a really famous scene in The Office, in the American version of The Office, where they're having a meeting and all of the staff are looking past their boss to the screensaver of the DVD player, which is just this logo bouncing around the screen. And every time it sort of bounces off the edges of the screen, every time it gets close to the corner of the screen, they're all like, "Oh," and then it's like, "Oh, I just missed." And that's like a style of watching that was really something that I think the people watching my game were heavily doing. Like when somebody was stuck at some point in the game and they were just like doing it over and over again, everyone was like super invested in seeing him get just a little bit further. And it was really working that way. And so sort of changed how I think about spectatorship in general, but also like in particular sort of video game spectatorship. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah. Do you think it's healthy to design games, like a certain section of the industry, I guess, to design games specifically for streaming? Do you feel like that's a fertile ground?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Totally. I mean, I think you should always design stuff with the situation, with the audience in mind. I mean, when we were making local multiplayer games for sports friends, we were definitely thinking about parties and lounge rooms and like whether there are people kind of backseat playing, whether there are people watching the game and kind of wanting to swap in. All of that stuff is super crucial to those sorts of games. So it's just an extension of that. I mean, we're now in a situation where skill-based games, even single-player ones, are going to take place partly or substantially online, and that's either something you can just, as a designer, you can just feel resentful about it and do nothing about it, or you can design with it in mind and try to make an experience that works. That is amplified by that, which is better than when that's the case.
Yeah, and it feels like a more focused thing. Like a couple of years ago, especially, there were so many games, maybe even from the AAA space, where people were saying, "Oh, they're trying to get that esports crowd and that framework in mind." And I feel like it's a cousin, but a healthier cousin of that, of just, okay, we're streaming focused. Like earlier on the podcast this week, we talked about SOS. Have you followed that game at all?
No.
It's a bizarre social focused kind of PUBG meets Survivor type thing, but it is heavily integrated with Twitch, and like they have emoticons going on like on the game itself, and just it's an assumption basically that everybody is streaming, and it's just a bizarre state to see a game in just out of the gate say, okay, we are purely focused on that streaming crowd. We're going all in on this specific thing.
Yeah, I mean, also the other thing about it is I've just been learning to understand the ways in which the streamers orient to their viewers, right? So that's like a thing that I didn't fully understand before. So I mean, there's a thing that's not a secret now, but when I launched the game, it was like it was a secret that at the end of the game, there's like a screen comes up that's like, do you want to go to the reward? You can only get the reward for finishing the game if you are not streaming or recording it, and so you have to like check a checkbox that says, yeah, I swear that I'm not streaming, I'm not recording, and it doesn't let you in until you've checked that checkbox. And I did that with the thought it would be more special for people to go to see that once, or it would be more meaningful to them if they had personally played through the game. Because I do believe there is a difference between playing games and watching them. I don't think that you get a full experience of a game by watching it. It's not to take away from viewership. I think that's just a different experience. But I didn't anticipate the kind of dilemma that would put streamers in.
You gave them like a Mass Effect, branching decision tree or something, just like this really stressful Walking Dead scenario that you didn't expect.
Well, I knew there would be some people who were just sort of jerks who would just be like, yeah, whatever, I click any checkbox, I don't care. What I didn't anticipate was that streamers would feel like an intense moral pressure to show their fans the reward. Like it's not just selfish. I don't think they're just being like, oh, I just want to do what I like. There's like a strong moral dilemma for them, which I totally didn't understand, not being a streamer and not really being into the culture. A Lyric got to the end, and he wound up like checking the checkbox saying he wasn't streaming and going in, and then felt really bad about it and immediately closed it and sent me an apology. But yeah, it made me realize that he really he felt both of those moral pressures, and I felt a little bad for putting people in that situation because I didn't anticipate that I'd be doing that. I thought it was just like a simple things like, oh yeah, you just understand that some things you keep them secret so it doesn't spoil it for people. Yeah. Right? Like everybody understands spoilers, but this is like a different rule from the rule against spoilers, right? That they have they feel a moral duty to spoil stuff, which is interesting, and it definitely changes what you would do as a designer.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm wondering how you could combat that more. Maybe like make people put in their telephone number on screen or something, just so like making sure it wasn't recorded in any way. Social security number.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in retrospect, I just wouldn't put people in that situation.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, to answer your original question, like those sorts of things have been a huge learning process for me. And definitely if I was going to make a game with this kind of audience in mind from the get-go, I thought I was making something that was like a little niche title that nobody would be streaming. And so I didn't really think about that stuff, but I probably would think about it from the get-go if I was trying to design a game for streamers.
Yeah, I've heard you in previous interviews talk about this concept that we've never brought up in the Game Informer podcast, at least, about anti-design and the anti-design trend. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, what I mean by that is just like anti-design orthodoxy. Like there are a bunch of things that we take to be like absolutely orthodox, essential elements of good game design. So what's good game design? Good game design is a kind of a smooth experience where you're never confused, you're never stumped as to what to do, you're never annoyed, you're never bored. You're on a perfect difficulty ramp that gets you like just enough competency so that you're always exerting the same amount of effort and you're always engaged at the exact same level.
Right.
And there's like a lot of effort put into making games like that. I think this is a norm that's been sort of inspired or established by really good games, like a lot of Nintendo EAD's most famous games are good design in this sense. And I think that there's a way in which if you're making a mainstream game, you aspire to this kind of good design. But yeah, I just kind of have found myself increasingly bored by that, by the kind of flat goodness of video games. I mean, I still enjoy a good video game, but it's just not exciting to me. I think that thinking back, the first time I remember really getting excited on this scale was Demon Souls.
Oh,
Demon
interesting.
Souls, it just bucks a bunch of trends, right? Like there's a bunch of things about it that are exciting because they're not really good design. Where it's like, I don't care what good design is, I'm going to make something that's a little bit unfriendly, or a little bit disobedient, a little bit uneven, and it makes it feel more particular and more of a kind of like you're having a unique experience when you first play Demon
So
Souls.
Demon Souls and Qwop are on the same family tree in your mind?
Yeah, well, it's interesting about Qwop, isn't it? I mean, it's like there is a thing that I did not do intentionally at first, but then I had to take steps to make sure it stayed this way, which is that when people encounter Qwop, they feel like they've discovered something that nobody else has played. And it's this weird, broken, sort of unintentional thing that works the way it works by accident. And it's on this kind of undiscovered web page, and it looks like a thing that has like never been kind of used by anybody. And it makes them excited to share it with other people. It's like, whoa, I found this weird thing. Have you seen this? Like, yes, everybody has seen it.
There's
Everybody
something
has
weird
seen
on the
Qwop.
internet, everybody.
But it's interesting that you can get that sense, and it would be so easy to break it, right? Like it'd be so easy to if there was like when you play, there's an old sort of Flash or JavaScript game called Snake Jump, which has always from the very beginning had like network leaderboards that you can see on the side of the screen. You can't possibly think you're discovering that, right? Because there's 100 million high scores on the side. And if I put a leaderboard on Qwop, that would have just ruined that feeling for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Like everyone feels like so. We're talking about anti-design. I mean, part of it is about giving people a sense of having an experience that is not that is a little wild, that is not curated, that has not been kind of provided by an approved set of venues or like curators who are deciding what's good and what's bad,
And just kind of feeling the personality of the creator a little bit more.
Yeah, well, that's definitely part of it. I would liken it to when you go to a weird record store and you go through the stacks and you find some kind of very, very deep cut, some kind of thing that other people have not heard. And even if it's not as polished or as kind of well composed or well orchestrated as the other songs that everybody knows, the popular songs are popular for a reason. I'm not against really popular culture.
Yeah.
But I think I value that kind of that sense of discovery, of blazing a trail, even if it's fake, even if it's a kind of a false sense. Turns out that everybody, I thought I discovered a new album that nobody knew about, and then as I started talking to people about it, I realized everybody has this album. That's fine, but it's the sense of discovery and newness that I love about these sorts of games, these unfriendly games, these games that don't care too much about good design.
The interesting thing to me that I'm trying to wrap my mind around is the overlap between what you call anti-design. By the way, did you come up with the term anti-design?
I don't think I did, but
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly where it's from.
Okay, all right. Well, the concept of anti-design and also streaming-friendly games.
Mm-hmm.
What is that Venn diagram like? Do you feel like one leads to the other in a way?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely ways in which that the sort of sense of unorthodox design, or even of kind of sort of brokenness in design, is draws viewers in. I think, at least in my observations. Like I said, I'm not like a stream fan myself, and it's not a thing that I spend a lot of time doing. But I do observe people watching my game be played, being surprised by things, being like joking about stuff that they think is bad or unfair or something like that. It makes it more of a shared experience with the stream. I think that's really like that's really what you're doing when you're watching a streamer play a game, is you're kind of sharing an experience in the way that you would with a friend if you were hot seating a game.
It's so tough for developers for the lesson to be, I should put more unfair stuff in my game. That'll get them talking. That'll sell those cafes.
Right. Well, I mean, it's of course it's not that simple. It's like you can make jokes by being mean to people, but if you just be mean to people, it's not guaranteed to be funny. So, it's I guess a little more nuanced than that. But
well, does it feel like the release of Getting Over It and the wild success of this game? Does it feel like a renaissance? Like, has it reinvigorated your sense of design? Does it feel like a whole new avenue of like, of course, if I focus on the streaming crowd, I feel like I'm going to be happy moving into the future?
it definitely opens up an option. I feel like it would be possible to design with that audience and with that context really heavily in mind and really enable it. And there have been games that did that, I think, to great effect. The sequel to I Want to Be the Guy, which is I Want to Be the Guy Gaiden, has a lot of stuff like that in it. It's like he put Michael O'Reilly put a feature in where he can jump in behind the scenes through an internet backdoor and watch you play, and he can like adjust the challenge and the settings for you and kind of troll you interactively, which would be amazing for a streamer game, right? Like if you could do that. So there are definitely things you can do. There's a lot of exciting opportunities. I can't say that that's what I'm going to do next. I sort of feel like, having made a game that I was intentionally unfriendly and uncommercial, I kind of want to make a orthodox commercial game just for a change. But
really, what does that mean in your mind?
I get bored very easily. I think the one thing I would say about my creative process generally is I can do things well once. If I have to do it twice, the second time is going to be way worse. It's just...
So people can roll out additional content or a sequel to Getting Over It?
Yeah, I kind of cashed out the ideas for level design, I think, to some extent. I mean, I may come back to it at some point and make more stuff, but it's like for me, it's a compact little self-contained art piece. I wouldn't want to make more levels without having more voiceover. It kind of seems like I've done it. I would be more interested in making a game along a similar line than a direct sequel or a DLC or anything like that.
I think that voiceover is so fascinating. Was that directly inspired by Beginner's Guide, or where did that actually come from?
Beginner's Guide, yes, and Sybil as well.
Oh, interesting.
Nina Freeman's game. Yeah, I advised Nina on her student project, which went on to later become Sybil. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of like deeply involved in thinking about that when she was working on that. And yeah, so I think drawing from Sybil a sort of sense of inserting yourself as a character in the game, or as a person next to the player in a kind of a sitting in their ear kind of sense, and drawing from the Beginner's Guide that sense of like narration. Although he's sort of fictionalizing himself, Davey is like fictionalizing himself in that game in some sense. It's not just Davey really. But those were the two inspirations. But it's more like those are kind of design pieces that helped me to solve a design problem I had, which was, if I'm going to make a game that is kind of making fun of the player, it's sort of at the expense of the player, provoking like feelings of anger or frustration in them, how could I justify that, right? Like, if I'm not going to give you any kind of saved if I'm going to be completely ruthless in terms of the props that I give you, I kind of wanted to shape and frame how people understood that. So it wasn't just read as kind of like cruelty or kind of laughing at the player's expense. And in order to do that, I felt like there was no other way to do it than to actually sort of explain myself in some way.
Yeah. You think
that's where it came from.
Gotcha. It's interesting just to think of the idea of a programmer designer inserting themselves. I mean, I feel like a majority of game designers I know are on the humble end of the spectrum and might have a tough time thinking that, like, I need to insert myself in my game in a very direct way.
It's not natural for me. I mean, I grew up in Australia, and in Australia you would be branded a wanker for doing that, for ever recording your voice or showing your face or any of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
We're raised to not believe that you should stick your head out and draw attention to yourself. in any way. And you add that to the kind of typical video game designer and fan kind of thing of being sort of relatively introverted or socially awkward, and it's like a double whammy. And I think it's no surprise that the trend amongst game designers since the 70s has been to kind of anonymize themselves, I think, generally, either with a pseudonym or just completely remove their name from the work. These days, it's more common. You see indie game designers, even if it's just one person, they'll put their company name up front. And they'll be like, the game will launch, even though the whole thing is loaded in 0.2 of a second, we'll watch a string of different company logos appear for 50, try to create this sort of impression of it being like a AAA game where these things are contractually required. It's very strange to me when I think about that, because I usually, as a fan of game designers, I usually want to know who made a thing.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating to me how difficult it can be to find out, both with retro games, if you play like old arcade games, particularly Japanese video games, console games and arcade games. It can be almost impossible in English language, even with Google, to figure out who designed a thing.
Right. The director of Sunset Riders is like S. Suzuki. It's like, who is this person?
Right. And that's the best case scenario. Sometimes it's just a little pseudonym. Sometimes there's just nothing.
Yeah.
And that was also true with a lot of the sort of Atari era American games. I think sometimes people were designing things under contract, and the company didn't want to credit them particularly much. And there were some exceptions, of course, like Sid Meier and
Tim Schafer.
Who put their name up front. But it is really like when I first did Bennett Foddy's Speed Chess as like a commission game, it was a joke. It's like a joke to do that because nobody would do that in indie games. It's so contrary to the vibe of anonymity and humility that it's a joke. But once I did that, I started to think more like, why don't we sign our work? It's not like novelists don't put their names on the front. It's not like directors don't put their names at the front. And, there's been some interesting, I think there are other people who agree with me. Like when Konami pulled that trick of removing Kojima's name from the front of Metal Gear Solid 5.
Yeah, what a fun trick.
Yeah.
What a hoot.
So he responds by making it's so that almost every second of the game that you're playing, there's credits on the screen.
Yeah.
Just constantly. His name comes up like 500 times.
It's basically over the HUD the entire game, yeah.
It is. And I love that. I thought that was just the best, funniest, most kind of excellent thing to do. So, yeah, I mean, I just want to see more of that. I want to see people identifying themselves with their games because especially, like, it's a little different if it's a big company of people and nobody wants to say, oh, I take credit for this because, I did all the work, because that's kind of bullshit in its own way. But especially with solo authored games, which there are a lot of, by the way, I just want to know who made them. I want to know a little bit about them. I feel like I get that from music and I get that from novels and films. I get to know a little bit, just a tiny bit, even if it's just through the work of that designer and or the artist and seeing other bits of work by them. I feel like it enriches my enjoyment of music that I know other songs by this musician and I can compare them and I can get a sense of what they're trying to achieve. And I think it's sad if we don't do that in games. So that was a kind of major motivation as well.
Even if it's
I also feel like, by the way, this is not all on the designers. I mean, I think this is substantially the fault of developers and designers. But I feel like one of the things that has resulted from that is that players of video games, by and large, don't know who designed the games. Right. And they kind of don't care as well. They kind of view games as corporate products that do not have a human dimension.
People barely know film directors, and I feel like that's so much easier than understanding that, like, hey, it's a big deal that Bruce Straley left Naughty Dog. He directed all those games. Like, this is going to have an impact in some way.
Right. Yeah, they don't. It's just like, well, the previous game in this 12-game series was better than this one.
Right.
And people don't generally know the stories of who actually worked on the games, even the really big famous ones, which have famous directors a lot of the time. And I just feel like that's kind of the only way that cycle gets broken is if designers and developers start actually signing their work. So that's where I'm coming from on
So
that.
do you feel like from here on out, it's going to be Bennett Foddy's multi-bowl and
No,
like
I mean
every game?
it won't. It's not always going to be that. I just in cases where I'm making something that's very personal, I think my name will be somewhere in there, and you won't be able to miss that it's in there.
Yeah. So getting over it is such a surprising hit. What does that mean for you? Do you buy yourself a sports car? Does it change your life in any way? I feel like so many indie game designers aspire to have a hit like getting over it. What can they expect if they land it?
I don't think it really changes that much for me in a kind of concrete way. I'm going to keep my job at NYU because I don't want to go insane in a room by myself. And I'm going to continue to make stuff. I was already, because I have a day job, I was my job at NYU, I should explain.
Yeah.
I teach half the time, and the other half of my time is supposed to be making games, right? So it creates a situation where there's not really any pressure to make things that will sell. And in fact, I was sure I was making a deliberately uncommercial thing in this case. So I don't really expect to change my process particularly much or anything like that. I have been lucky enough to be able to keep a job and be able to just work on things that interested me at times that I felt like working on them, and that has been a kind of a gift. And I'm just going to continue doing that because it's enjoyable to me.
Yeah. So NYU, I mean, is it literally teaching classes? Is it just kind of okay? It is.
Yeah, it's like a art school model. So they're sort of smallish classes where it's kind of really focused around creating video games and giving critique on them. A certain amount of learning kind of skills, obviously, because you need a lot of skills to make a video game. But yeah, that's the model we've been doing. I've been there for about 5 years now, coming up on 5 years.
It's a nice place. People should check it out. Just NYU Game Design.
NYU Game Center.
Game Center. Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So with the announcement, was it last week? It feels like a lifetime ago, of Nintendo Labo. I thought of you. You must have been riveted by that thing. Did you have any gut reactions to Nintendo's new initiative with the Switch?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I mean, I came up at a time in the like when you would go to a video game arcade and all the games have different controllers, or like many of them have different controllers. It's really one of the things that's lovely about those. A lot of those old arcade games is the diversity of hardware surfaces. Everything is consolidated now around a gamepad with a certain number of buttons, or keyboard and mouse. Even Nintendo's thing, basically not that like the Switch controls. Although I love playing with the one Joy-Con in each hand, like so I can just like on the couch just like this. But
you're that guy, okay?
It's the same number of buttons ultimately, and I think that's sad. So anything that gives us more of an ability to mess around with that, I think it's cool. I think particularly I like games where there's like a sort of sense of analogousness. We don't have a good word for this in English, but when there's like a correspondence between the action that you're doing with the controls and the action that's happening on the screen.
Waggle, I think is the word you're looking for.
Waggle, right. At its best, Waggle can be like this. But I think that there's more of a sense of embodiment in the game that comes out of that, and that's really cool. I mean, if I think about my favorite old arcade games, a lot of them are like that. There's the driving games that involve a wheel. One of my favorite games of all time, maybe my favorite, is 720 Degrees, it's the skateboarding game, which has a joystick that's on a fixed, like a spinner, like an arc. So you can just point your skateboard in the actual direction that you want it to point. And there's like a physicality of that I love. And I hope that some of those experiences will come out for the Labo. I mean, I feel like it's targeted at kids, which is great and fine. But then if that being the case, I hope that the kids will get that sense that maybe controls don't have to be standardized and that there can be like a range of different experiences. Maybe like one of the dreams that would come out of this would be maybe one of these little cardboard experiments winds up paving the way for something that is like a more robust, full-featured thing that you would never have tried building if you didn't have the cardboard version first.
So it's the paper test for game design before Nintendo makes a real fishing pole?
It is exactly a paper prototype that you're putting out there in the world for everybody to try and see if it catches on. Which is great. That's a fantastic thing. And, if it reduces the amount of plastic in the landfill, that's also great.
Would you ever have any interest designing a Labo game?
Yeah, absolutely. If I had a good idea for it, I think it would be a fun thing. I don't know how easy it's going to be for third-party developers to design the cardboard bits. I think we have to wait to find out about that. But if it was easy to kind of do, like to build at the development stage, yeah, absolutely. I think there's lots of great ideas there.
Awesome. Well, hey, we're excited to see what you work on next. I'm very curious to see how mass audience you want to go with this thing. Is that still just a vague idea in your mind, or do you have a vision of like, this will be the next very orthodox game that I make?
I make a lot of prototypes. I throw away about 80% of them, maybe 90%. The next thing that I'm interested in, I've been playing a lot of golf games.
Huh.
So over the summer, I played an enormous amount of Golden Tee. Speaking of like weird analogous controls, it's got that trackball control that I love. And then playing golf with your friends, which is like a Steam title that's pretty popular, right? It's mini golf. And I feel like there's a lot of interesting stuff that you can do there. Golf is super unforgiving and frustrating in the same way as getting over it is. I think that moment when people choke in golf, you're neck and neck with a friend, you're playing head to head, and it's the 17th hole, and you're at the same exact score. And then somebody blows out and it's like plus 15 or something like that.
And then bats fly out and attack you golfing. Yeah. Got it.
I love that moment. I love that choking. It's like what I love watching the Olympics as well. When somebody's trained for 4 years and they're by far and away better than everybody else, and they're way out in front of the field. And there's that crazy case of the American pistol shooter who was so far ahead of everybody in the gold medal match that for his final shot, he just had to hit the target. And he'd like bullseyed just about every other shot. He just had to hit the target, and he crossfired and hit somebody else's target on the bullseye.
Oh, no.
And he wound up with like a bronze or something like that. And, that was good enough on its own. But then the following Olympics, he did the same thing again in the gold medal match, the same exact situation. And I love that not because of the kind of suffering of the athlete, although that's funny a little bit, but mainly because it shows how much they care about it, right? Like there's a level of importance that, like the way that athletes feel about the Olympics, we can't usually touch as regular humans, right? Like we can't get how much they care about it. But in those moments, you can feel it a little bit. And I think that's when sports and video games and parlor games, all of those sorts of things, I think that's when they're at their best, is when people care about them too much, when it's like unhealthy, when they care like way more than they should, and where we can understand that and kind of feel it with them. I love those moments. So that's why golf is super great in this dimension. I think we've got to have more golf games.
Interesting. I'm very curious to see what you end up doing with it if you bring the golf game to fruition. But Mr. Foddy, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been
Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much for watching this excerpt from the Game Informer Show podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version and listen to new episodes airing every Thursday. We cover big games on the horizon, games that we've just reviewed. We have long-form developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So check it out every Thursday.